And now at least one civilian is killed by a police officer every day in the country. This is based on the findings by police watchdog Viewfinder. According to the Police Accountability Tracker dashboard, at least 47,000 police brutality cases were registered between 2012 and 2020. The study found that officers often go unpunished due to the failure of the SAPS's internal disciplinary mechanism. Let's discuss this further with the Viewfinder editor, Daneel Knoetze. Daneel, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's play, just want to play devil's advocate here of the numbers that you're talking about. You're saying at least one civilian is killed by the police every day of the year. How many of these killings are unlawful, vis-a-vis how many are they self-defense from the police's side?
That's right. You certainly point to something which is well worthy of problematizing within the data. Police officers in South Africa execute an extremely difficult and challenging and dangerous job and serve a very critical function in society, which is as violent and as crime-ridden as South Africa is. But nonetheless, within the data that is registered to the police watchdog IPID every year, there are complaint descriptions captured, especially for people that have survived allegedly violent interactions with police. And in those descriptions and in those allegations, there certainly is a trait and an indication that very often when force and violence is used by the police service, it is done so in circumstances where certainly the use of force is not justified by law. Of course, the people that have been killed by the police in this country have got no recourse to be able to tell the story of what happened, and very often it is the police officers themselves that revert to an explanation of a self-defense and of a lawful use of force. Unfortunately, so many of these killings happen without other witnesses being present that it's difficult to pin down exactly how many of them were unlawful. And that's why an investigative agency and the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, exists. This is IPID's data that was published today. And unfortunately, South Africans know, and the criminal justice sector policy experts know, that IPID is woefully under-resourced to be able to execute its investigative function properly. And so many of these killings are reported and unfortunately not properly investigated in its time.
I mean, those are the killings, which is a tragedy in itself, but then of great concern. I mean, some of the numbers here we're looking at, torture cases, you know, for instance, here Mitchell's Plain in the Western Cape, the police there accused of 12 rapes. You've got so many, I mean, torture, rape. When did we start torturing civilians as police officers?
Well, Tony, it actually never left us. Torture's been deeply ingrained in the police service from the time of apartheid, from the time of colonialism. And I think what our investigation has shown is that the propensity of police officers to employ the use of force, and particularly the use of torture on criminal suspects as a means of interrogation and of extracting information, has actually persisted, and dare I say even pervaded the police service. If you look at the statistics, I say pervaded because many hundreds of torture cases have been registered since 2012, and those torture cases come from all 9 provinces. They come from rural precincts, they come from urban townships, and they even come from your white and wealthy and middle upper class suburbs. And so torture is certainly something that this database highlights as a persistent problem within the police service. And the other problem and the challenge, of course, is the failure of accountability and the failure of proper discipline and consequence management within the institution itself. Because if I may add, even though we have an investigative agency in the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, that agency is still very much dependent on the management of the South African police service to enact its findings and to ensure that discipline is meted out when prima facie cases of wrongdoing, of misconduct, of abuse, of violence, of torture and unlawful killings are found to have been committed against the South African police service.
Okay, now, so there's very little accountability is what you're saying. IPID is under-resourced. The other thing of concern here is, the police integrity, the training of the police. In your statement, you say shooting an unarmed stranger in the back. Out of 900 police, most of them were not even sure if that was unlawful or if it was lawful. You also talk about striking a handcuffed man in the kidneys. Police officers were unsure if that's lawful or unlawful, but isn't that just basic that you can't, if somebody's handcuffed, you're not supposed to be striking them in the first place? How can they not know that?
What was actually quoted there was a study that was done by the Institute for Security Studies, and they did a survey of 900 police, and essentially the findings of those surveys was that there was a great ambivalence and a great uncertainty around the use of force in the execution of everyday policing duties. And by that I mean a use of lawful and unlawful force, and being able to make a distinction between the two. And it was a tidbit in the article, I think an important one that I raised, and it just speaks to something about, it speaks to a culture, I believe, that has ingrained itself and entrenched itself within the police service, where there is an ambivalence around the use of force, and where that ambivalence and uncertainty permeates into everyday policing duties. It becomes more and more present. The failure of accountability for those acts of misconduct, of course, communicates to police officers that it's actually acceptable, and repeat offences can therefore be enabled. And as repeat offences are enabled, there's often an escalation in the severity of the allegations that a certain problem officer, if you will, may be accused of in time. And that, I think, is the indictment that this data speaks to, is the fact that the misuse of force appears to be so pervasive and so regular within the police service. And if we buy into the police service's own rhetoric that these are bad apples, that these are exceptional officers, it speaks to an enabling environment for exceptional, abusive and problem officers within the South African police service. And that enabling environment, that silence, that lack of accountability is certainly the scourge in the police service that this investigation and this dashboard that we brought out today hopes to address and confront.
Well, look, I mean, some of the numbers are really shocking, but thank goodness it's out in the open. Viewfinder editor there, Daneel Knoetze, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. Upwards of 380 people killed by the police. That's literally more than one person per day. In all fairness, they're not all unlawful killings.